Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is Saturday morning. This is Multifamily Unplugged. I hope that you had a great week and that things are going well for you. Here we are in the beginning of the second quarter already. God, it's hard to believe that this year is just flying by already. It just, time goes so fast in everything that we do. And I just, I feel the urge this morning just to encourage you again to, we have a tendency to work really hard and grind it out, right? And, in many cases, we don't take time to step back and, just enjoy life and enjoy the people around us. And so I want to encourage you today that whatever you're doing this weekend, make sure that you spend some time with family, spend some time with those people you care about, and get rejuvenated, right? I think that our weekends are important for us to, really get refocused, recalibrated for Monday morning. And when Monday morning comes around, hit it hard again. It goes back to intentionality and being intentional about what we are doing and how we are growing. I'm super excited about this morning's show. And for those of you that are new, welcome. If somebody told you about this show, thank them. I know you're going to want to buckle up this morning. We're going to have a really good conversation about real estate wealth building, how we can build wealth in real estate systematically and over time. That, real estate you don't have to build wealth in real estate right now today, but it happens over time. And my guest this morning, Joel Miller from Erie, Pennsylvania, wrote a book called Build Real Estate Wealth. Enjoy the journey of real estate investing. And we're gonna dive in today and talk about that. So I know that you will enjoy today's show. Please remember to subscribe to our channels. Like our stuff, pass it on to somebody else, repost it, let other people see it, because today's message is going to be really strong. So let me bring Joel in.
Hey, Mike.
Joel, good morning. How are you?
Oh, good morning. I'm looking forward to this too. It's going to be cool.
Good to see you again. Boy, you mentioned before we went live here that, the last time we talked was in July, and you asked if you could come back, and I said, absolutely. I enjoyed our conversation last time. You talked so much about systematic wealth in real estate and building wealth over time. And, you have done a phenomenal job with that. So I'm looking forward to diving into some of that today.
Yeah. I mean, the title of the book implies it's not a quick process. It's Build Real Estate Wealth. And the subtitle is Enjoy the Journey of Rental Property Investment. And that also implies that if you're not doing it right, you're not going to enjoy it, and maybe give up, and I feel that the key to overcoming fears and the inability to move forward is simply education. I mean, knowledge takes away fear. When you understand the thing that you're fearing, then you don't have to fear it anymore. You simply plan how to be courageous about it, And I mean, courage is doing something even though you're still afraid.
Right. Right.
The idea is that you can overcome your apprehensions by understanding, and understanding comes through education, and education comes from all kinds of things like materials like my book, seminars, boot camps, rubbing up against other investors at local meetups, of investors or landlords and so on. Just take it in, and you don't have to know everything to start. We have a branch campus of Penn State here in Erie, and they have a really good business department here. And this is where my son actually goes to school there. But one of the students, who happens to have been a long time friend of my son and knows me already, has asked me to be a mentor for him, and he's also in the business department. It's actually a mentoring program that they have at the campus. So we've been talking routinely, and we just had a conversation this morning before I recorded this. And he came to me with a bunch of questions about more about his personal situation than like is he ready? Do I view him as being ready to make his first investment in real estate, as opposed to some of the more technical questions about real estate that we sometimes talk about? And one of his questions was, how do I overcome my apprehension of doing all this in so many words? And I told him what I just told you. I said, you got to get educated, and above all, you don't have to know it all before you start. You just have to know enough to take a first step without making a mistake, and understand that you're going to learn what you need to know as you do it, and as you take in more educational material. And so, you don't want to get the paralysis of analysis. You've heard of that, Mike, right? Where you
100%.
do anything because you got to think it through too much, and then you don't do anything. But I said to him, you just need to get to the point where you are comfortable making your first investment in a 2-unit, but you don't need to feel like you know how to own an apartment complex right now.
Right.
That comes later. So,
yeah. Hey, listen, before we get going here, and I want to compare your answer to the last time you were on the show.
Okay.
In one word, what best describes you personally and professionally?
Oh, I might have a new word for you, Mike.
Okay.
This is a word you don't use a lot, but steadfast. Steadfast.
That can go cycles right into your building wealth over time, right? Systematically over time.
Right. Yes. Like we touched on briefly there, it's a building wealth in real estate is not a overnight thing for the most part. You have to decide to do a lot of things for the long term, for the overall good, and I believe that real estate doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, though. A lot of the point of the book is that you can add rental real estate to your quote unquote already busy life, and because you have something else that you don't want to give up, like a good career or a job you love or a hobby you put a lot of time into. But those things are not giving
Right.
you all the income you need or all the retirement you need. And the idea is that you can add rental real estate to whatever else it is that you have going. But if you want to, and the book gives you the tools for this, you can get it to the point where you leave your W-2 job, which is, of course, the goal of a lot of people that start out into real estate.
Yeah. Well, I know last time we were here, we talked about the first rental house you ever bought, that you still own that today.
Yeah.
And it's been 30 plus years, right?
It was 48 years a couple months ago from when I bought that, in January of 78. And I still actually have my first 3 properties. I've sold a number of the ones that came by after that. By the way, I saw in the back of my mind, I got to ask you, you must have kept a record. What was the word that I gave you last time we talked?
I don't have it handy, but I will. Okay. I will go back and get it.
I'm sure it was probably maybe something like loyal or something. It's just the idea that I stick with things.
Yeah.
So steadfast, loyal, whatever.
Yeah.
But yes, I still have that property, and a few of them, and they are doing well. They're not in the greatest part of town. They're not they didn't turn out to be by any means my best properties from a building quality or neighborhood standpoint, but it was just all part of the big picture. They have a great cash flow.
Yeah. And I want people to really resonate on that comment for a minute, right? That you've owned a property for 48 years. It's not in the best neighborhood, but you've been able to manage it. You've paid it off how many times and pulled cash out of it? How many times? And use that cash to go leverage it and buy another property. So, there's a lot to be said for that methodology. I always say there's a lot to be said for my madness, in how I do things sometimes.
Organized confusion.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. When you were saying how many times have I refinanced, I think probably 3 or 4 over the years. I mean, it's been paid for now for a number of years, and that's by design because I think we probably talked about this at our last meeting, but I have a son who's 20 now that bought his first rental property a week out of high school in 2024 and bought another one about a year later. And right now, as we speak, he's doing his first flip property, which he chose to do because he needs to compile, a chunk of money to buy our property. The ones that I have are likely that we mentioned I've had for 48 years, along with a number of other ones we've acquired since then, are going to go to him in a purchase where we hold the financing. And so we switch from getting rental checks to getting a check from our kid every month. Mike, what is better than that? The money starts flowing the other way, So, but they have.
You're getting paid back. You're getting paid back for all those years, Joel.
Yeah. I mean, we'll give them a good deal on it, and we'll give them a great deal on the financing. But I said, I'm not going to go to the closing to sell you my properties and bring money to the closing to sell it to you, because you haven't given me a down payment. So yeah, that was the purpose of the flip, and he'll probably do a couple more. He's in his second half of his sophomore year in the business department at Penn State, and if you asked him now, he'd say he's a finance major. So I hope he understands that way of financing, and he does. He understands, and he's looking forward to it. He anticipates, taking these things over right after college, and he's off and running.
So, Joel, you have been in the business for 50 years.
Almost, yeah.
And
if you want to count the time, don't forget what you're saying, but if you want to count the lead up to when I first closed to buy my first property, yeah, there was well over a year there where I was studying. I was reading hardcover books by like Bill Nickerson and Al Lowry and those guys, and
Bill
then eventually
Nickerson. That's a name I haven't heard in years.
Yeah. Bill Nickerson was Ron LeGrand's mentor,
Right.
Ron told me that himself. I brought in a picture of the Mark Harrelson's Financial Freedom Report, or a copy of the Financial Freedom Report from the 90s that Ron and I had both contributed articles to. And on the front of it, it had a portrait of Bill Nickerson, and Ron goes, "Oh my gosh, he was my mentor." He had forgotten about that image on that picture. But
one thing I'll tell you is that a lot of the listeners on this show don't know those names. They don't know Carlton Sheets, Ron LeGrand, Robert Allen, all people that you and I learned from, right?
Sure.
And mentors from a distance, I call it. Now, there were a couple of those guys that I bought all their books, all their tapes, and went to their seminars and events, which I just think people should do. It keeps you motivated, keeps you educated, keeps you updated on changes in the market and things going on.
Yeah. Back in the day, we would buy those cassette tape courses with the little manual you followed through from the late night cable TV real estate guru guys.
Right. The old infomercial. Right. The old.
But you started to say something about I've been in this 50 years, and you were going to say.
Yes. So you're the second guy I know that's been in the business that long. I went to a meetup about a month ago where the host of the meetup had been in real estate. They were celebrating his 50-year anniversary. And he was a creative finance guy, did everything he did, never buys a property traditionally, uses creative financing all the time.
I will, don't forget what you're saying, but I will add that first property I bought in 1978 was the only property I ever bought through a realtor. That property was listed on the multi-list, and I found it and got a realtor and bought the property, and every deal after that was some sort of creative financing.
Yeah. And it just goes to show you that if you do the work and you put the effort in, that the results are going to happen. There's 8 billion people on the planet. somebody's got a house that they need to get out of because they're in a lot of pain.
Everybody needs a place to live too. So this is not a fad. Housing is not a fad that's going away.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
So, Joel, I know you've been in the business 50 years. You've seen market cycles go up, market cycles go down. Where do you think we're at in this market cycle right now?
Do you know, Mike, it feels pretty normal right now. If I were to kind of average out the past 50 or so years, when I bought my first rental property, Jimmy Carter was president. They was struggling with inflation. The prime was something like 22%. You know, uh, I don't even know how I got that first mortgage, and then it made sense. But and then I was a tenant in an apartment complex for the first 5.5 years that I was also a landlord. So in '83, when I went to buy my first personal residence, I was pleased to get 12.5% for the interest on my personal residence mortgage, and that was an improvement, from 5 years before that. So you're right. There's just been a lot of ups and downs, and that's that's going to happen. I mean, you look at 2008 as maybe the low point recently, and it's, I think, improved since then. But COVID kind of threw a wrench into it, that did some good things and some bad things. I mean, a lot of values of real estate went up a lot during that time period, as did rents. And I feel that right now there's a bit of a leveling off. Now, it's hard to speak on this because real estate, as you know, the market for real estate is very localized. There's not really a national market. Whenever you think about places like where you live in California, or say Arizona or Florida, where you're subject to a lot more of the ups and downs than we might be here. In Pennsylvania, especially in our area, we kind of just sort of chug along. And I think that's the way it is in a lot of markets across the country. Like, we look at typically just chugging along like a 3% increase every year with values of property, at least single family homes, and that was out of whack during COVID, of course, but it's kind of back to that now. And that's why I say it feels sort of normal to me right now. I think it's still a little, at least in our area, a bit of a seller's market. It's still the case that when places come on for sale, if they're nice, then they'll go quickly, but maybe not so often by the end of the day with all cash offers that are greater than the list price, which was going on during COVID. Not so much like that now. And it's also not at all a struggle to sell a place once it gets on the market. Things seem to be, moving along at what I would call a kind of a normal pace, and a predictable pace, a good environment for investing, because you have a little bit of a good sense of what the outcome is going to be.
And I want people to understand we're primarily talking about residential.
Yeah,
We're
residential rentals and single family homes, multifamily.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what's interesting is I think everybody freaked out when interest rates went from 2.5%, 3% and shot up to 7%. Everybody freaked out. Oh my God, the world's coming to an end. But people don't know, understand that you and I know a normal market at 6%, right? I mean, you said you got in the business, interest rates were 22. When I got in the business, interest rates were 11, and on the way down from 22. And, they'll come down again, but they're not going to come down drastically. And some of us won't even see, big drops in our lifetime anymore. So,
yeah.
but But people need to understand, and I think a lot of people have this misconception that interest rates need to be low, that the market, it needs to be a, um, a, a booming market. But listen, I think you and I both have made money in up markets and down markets,
Okay.
and that it's possible to do that.
hmm Yeah, the prime at 3.25 for 5 years or whatever, that everybody should know that's not normal at all, you know.
Right.
And of course, prime only sort of informs what mortgage rates are going to be. That's not, mortgage rates aren't directly tied to the prime for the most part, but the point is that that was a low interest rate environment, and long-term mortgages were 3, 4, 5% maybe, and I think that I have this little theory, Mike, that people that get into real estate and are in the process of educating themselves are the ones that are more likely to be the ones showing up at meetups, going to seminars, going to training and so on, and listening to podcasts. It's a theory that
Yeah.
there's a that that at any given time the attendees at those places or the listeners are a little more weighted toward the newer people. And as you think you figure it out and you think you don't need to learn anything, maybe you kind of drop off and do your own thing and you don't tune in as much. It's a little bit of a theory. So having said that, a lot of the people that are uh, attending and listening and reading and so on have come into the business since the uh, period of low interest rates that we just talked about. And so when it goes to what it is right now, they can think that the world's coming apart or something like that. But really, it's just going back to normal. And what I worry about is, and I haven't seen it a lot as much as it was predicted, was the deals that people got into, say, 5 years ago when interest rates were low, that have an adjustable interest rate after 5 years.
Yeah.
Now they get adjusted upward, and suddenly the deal that they got into a while back doesn't make quite as good a sense to them. And
Right.
what I was afraid of is that we would hear a lot more about foreclosures and so on from investors that suddenly went negative on their cash flow because their interest rates got adjusted because they bought too skinny of a deal in the first place.
Right. Right.
Haven't
Yeah.
heard about it as much as I thought we might, but
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing some multifamily deals come to the market that we're underwriting that, they're they're discounted pretty well because of that reason, right? So they were floating rate debt and the seller's in trouble and they need to get out. And there's not as many as everybody said there was going to be, but there are some deals that are coming up.
Mhm.
And there is opportunity out there for the buyer and for the passive investor. I mean, for the
Sure.
passive investor to get involved with an operator that has a great story. But here's what I wanted to ask you a question about traditional funding, right? Going to a bank, getting a loan versus
Mhm.
creative financing.
Mhm.
How much creative financing have you done on deals over the years? How much traditional financing? Has it all been one or has it been a split?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, that first property I bought was the only time that I went to a bank for a mortgage until we did buy some larger properties like little apartment complexes, maybe 5, 6 years ago, and those were traditional loans from a bank. I say we, it was is my wife and I. That was just the way to do those because they had mortgages on them with the seller, and they couldn't hold the financing on them, uh, and the rates were good. I mean, we're talking 20. Well, let me see, like 2017. Right around in there, and other than that, I've used a lot of creative financing, either with owners holding the paper, you know, um, and they get payments every month with a small down payment, which is how my son bought his first rental out of high school. He did 5% down payment, 30-year amortization, 8-year balloon, 6% interest, and that just, and it was fully occupied, and it wasn't a rundown property.
Yeah.
He put very little into it in maintenance and stuff. So, that was, I told him, I said, Brandon, it's a bit of a unicorn. Enjoy it, but they're out there. So I'm a firm believer that off-market deals are typically the best deals, in the sense that once a property is listed for the purpose, that's why you list a property, to expose that property to as many possible potential buyers as you can. And of course, you pay for that in fact, in the sense that, or in the actuality that you would pay a real estate commission when you sell it. That's what the realtors, that's what they're earning, is the marketing of your property. And so with the exposure to more and more buyers through a listing, then it just simply has the result that the seller needs, which is that the property goes for the highest possible price that it could, because more people are interested in it because it was exposed. So if you can put together off-market deals, typically you can get them for less money, and also open the possibility of doing some sort of creative financing, with the seller taking back paper or something like that. So.
And how are you finding your deals, your off-market deals? What techniques do you use, or what works best for you?
Okay, at this point, I no longer have any official marketing going on for the properties. My son is going to have to move into that as he develops his interest. For me, when you are in the same market for your entire career, or 48 years in my case, the deals come to you, as much as I want them to at this point, with just people that know that this is what I do, and realtors that know that they can call, with deals, and other investors that have projects that have come up, or opportunities that came up because of their marketing that is just more than they can handle, and they might pass it off to me. Give you an example of just being around this. I mentioned that my son is doing this flip right now. Well, this backstory on this house, it was occupied by the original owner from 1957, who has passed away, and his 3 kids have it, and they cleared it out, and it's in livable condition, but not updated. And they put it on the market, and with a realtor, and it sold for $180,000.
Wow.
And the people buying it were going to move into it and work on it as they live there to modernize it. And so the closing was set for this past January 8th. Day after Christmas, a huge tree in the yard fell on the house. It's a ranch, and crushed it all the way down to the living room floor. Well, obviously that killed that deal, because the people buying it intended to live there.
Yeah, right.
So that realtor, who is somebody that I've known for a long time, started making calls to contractors, because at this point this was no longer going to be a normal, let's list this property and try to sell it with a hole through the roof.
Right.
I mean, they put a temporary roof on it, and they had to remove the ceiling of the entire living room, dining room area, and it was just no longer that sort of a deal. So that's how we ended up with it. Finding out about it through the realtor, just calling up whoever they thought might be able to take this on. Well, I could have taken it on, but instead we made it my son's first project, and so they went from selling this from $180,000 to selling it to him for $80,000.
Wow.
He's going to put 120 into it, and he's going to sell it for 300.
Wow.
I
Good
said,
for
Brandon,
him.
that's a unicorn too. Enjoy that.
Yeah, that's a great first step. That's for sure. Good for him. Boy, you got some great stories on him the last couple of times we've been on the podcast. So let's talk about your book a little bit.
Okay.
Talk about your thesis behind the book and why you wrote it and why people should read it.
Well, I started writing when we were all sitting around during COVID in 2020, and it was like a 4-year writing, well, 3-year writing process and a 1-year production process that came out a little over a year ago, and we've been marketing it the past year. And I wrote it basically thinking that it might be my son as the only one that reads it, because when he was a teenager then, and it was becoming apparent that he wanted to follow me in this business. So I can tell you and anybody listening that nothing in this book is anything that I haven't done or that I wouldn't do if I would have the opportunity. And in other words, there's nothing in it that I wouldn't tell my own son to do. There's no BS, and it became, as I wrote it, I realized, I ought to make sure that this is nicely produced and put it on the market, because it's a problem, and it's become kind of the new go-to resource for changing your life with rental property. It's sort of the big book. It's most books in the genre are like 200 or 300 pages. You've seen a lot of them, but this one is like 460 pages because it encompasses the time before we talk about acquiring property and after we talk about how to get rid of the property or sell property and have tenants and so on. Because it starts with discussing the mindset that you need to have for doing this sort of investing. And it moves into building your team, like your attorneys, realtors, whatever, contractors, and so on, and forming the entity if you want to have an entity to buy your property. And then we talk about preparing a property, acquiring property and financing it, preparing it to rent or sell, finding tenants and keeping tenants, managing your property. And we go into the tax implications of being in this business and how to run your office. And then we get into also preparing. This is really key. Because my accounting is a background. My background is in accounting. I used to be an accountant. I had an accounting practice for about 5 years right out after I got out of college, while I was starting to build my portfolio and so on. And so I spent a lot of time in there talking about how to prepare your financial statements to look good to the lenders, because you might be good at all the other aspects of owning and operating property, like acquiring it, financing it, fixing it, and selling it, whatever. But if you are not good at finding tenants, that's another thing we spend a lot of time on, is selecting tenants. And also, if you're not good at being able to present yourself to lenders, you're going to have trouble, in the business. You'd be selling yourself short if you don't get good at those sort of things. But we move into bonus material on house flipping. It's not about house flipping. I mean, the book is about rentals, but I wanted, because I flipped over 100 houses, since the 90s. I did put the about house flipping chapter in there, but there's a QR code at the end of it that'll take you to bonus material. It's the how-to of house flipping. But we get into discussing things like the difference between riches and wealth. I mean, there's a difference. It's like the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Two different things that somehow get used together sometimes. But nobody should think that this is just for beginners. This is also for established investors that are looking for some, information that's going to supercharge what they already have going. And like I told you, it's instruction on how to add it to something in your life, a career, whatever, that you don't want to give up, but also how to take it all the way to giving up your W-2 job. We mentioned Ron LeGrand earlier.
Right.
He's kind of the guru of gurus. Like if the younger listeners out there think of a guru that they like, probably Ron was their guru. Okay. And Ron reviewed the book. He got a copy of it. And here's what Ron said. He wrote this. He said, "I wish I would have had his book when I was getting started." So that's where we've landed on it. And I would tell you 3 things. First of all, if you belong to a local group that of investors or landlords that meets and is educating your members, you could use this as your textbook without having to write your own material like my organization had to do like 10 or 12 years ago for our Landlord 101 class, which I teach. But you could literally teach right out of this book. If you don't want to create your own material, just use it for instructing your members at your organization. And we mentioned Ron LeGrand. There's another guy we all know, Robert Kiyosaki,
Yeah.
Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah.
I believe everybody that's ever read a copy of Rich Dad Poor Dad should read a copy of my book, because it's a perfect complement to what the ideas are in Rich Dad Poor Dad. My book would give you a little more of the details of how to do it. And the last thing I would tell you is it's not a lead-in to an upsell to some sort of mentoring or coaching or seminars, boot camps, anything like that. I don't have any of that. Others do a much better job at that than I would be interested in doing. I just have this book, and this book could be all that somebody needs to get past their hesitations on getting involved in real estate. So.
Well, I know that. How do people get a hold of it?
The easiest way is to go to the website that's dedicated to the book. It's very simple, joelmillerbooks.com. JoelMillerbooks.com. And on that homepage, you can see the entire table of contents. There's a little button that'll open up the whole table of contents in detail. You can see exactly what's in there. And another button that will give you sample content from each chapter.
Nice.
You can actually read several paragraphs from each chapter. And there's buy buttons all over the website, Mike. Of course, we got to do that. You click on the buy, and it'll take you right to the page on Amazon where it's for sale. It's on Amazon and about 15 other platforms that you can find it, that sell books. And that's the best way.
Great. Well, Joel, I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me again, Mike.
What are you working on this year? Are you still buying assets? Are you just helping your son grow his portfolio now? What are you working on?
Okay, I have shifted in recent years from acquisition to I have sold off a number of our properties and down to what my son is going to acquire from us. So what are you doing with all that money, Joel? Well, I'm a hard money lender.
How do you avoid those taxes with all that money, Joel?
Yeah. You almost can't unless you have been, doing 1031 exchanges all along, with the property. But I try to spread them out so they don't all happen in one tax year. But and I've sold some properties, and this is part of a good partial answer to your question. I've sold some of the properties holding the paper to other investors. I told you we were going to sell the properties to my son that way. That means I won't have a big gain all in the 1 year that we sell to him, because it'll only be reported commensurately with the payments that come in. You know how that works. So some of them have already been sold to other investors that are not my son, and that helps spread out the tax burden there. But I have actually since 2018 concentrated more on being a hard money lender to the other investors in our area here, which means I'm funding the projects that the other investors come up with, either as single family homes they're flipping and selling to a third party, or keeper rental properties that they need to stabilize before they can get a long-term mortgage from a bank. So that has been the most rewarding thing I have ever done, actually, not only financially but from just a satisfaction of being part of the equation for so many other investors that I've gotten to know in this area here that are just crushing it, and expanding their portfolios and doing things that they wouldn't have been able to do if they didn't have access to what we call hard money lending, to be able to get 100% of the purchase price on a property, maybe 100% of the rehab costs. So it's been really rewarding to me to just be part of the equation for the other investors in our area here that are, I mentioned that a lot of them are just crushing it. They're doing a lot of projects that they wouldn't have been able to do if they didn't have access to what we call hard money lending. to be able to borrow 100% of a purchase price, maybe 100% of the rehab costs as well. And if you got a good enough deal, we'll do that. And they pay off, of course, whenever they get permanent financing or sell the property to somebody else within a year. It's all short term. Yeah.
Sure. And do you only do that in your market? Or you do other markets?
No, I've not loaned outside of northwestern Pennsylvania. There's enough here going on that with the amount that we have to work with, that I don't lend outside of our area.
Got it. Yeah. All right. Well, Joel, I appreciate you being here. Even with some of the technical challenges we had today, I think we carried a good message to the listeners. And, for those people that listen to this, I'd go back and listen to it again, because we dropped some golden nuggets, and we name dropped a little bit and let some people know, and maybe some other people they could go back and listen to. But I really want to encourage the listeners to go get your book. I know that those step-by-step guides like that will give people direction. And the one thing that you said was mindset. And I think so many people, they get discouraged way too early. And this, Joel, 50 years in the business. I've been in the business almost 35. And, you got to stay committed. You stay the course. You can't get absorbed by shiny object syndrome or, a squirrel looking for another nut, right? You got to stay the course. So, but I appreciate you being here, and certainly look forward to continuing our relationship. And
I might add that we talked about market cycles. I don't believe that there's that it works like there's a good time to buy and a bad time to buy. There's simply times when you shift to different methods. A good deal is a good deal,
right?
No matter what the market is. I have been buying property for this whole time period with all these market cycles, and it doesn't matter what the market cycle is. You just change the tactics that you have for either marketing or putting the deal together, and keep moving. There's a good deal to be found at any given time, somehow, some way. And in my book, we're talking about hard money lending. I don't want to discourage people thinking like, oh, the guy only lends in northwestern PA. I don't live there. You will find guys like me everywhere. Especially if you belong to organizations that meet up, like investors and landlords meet together, you'll find out that there are hard money lenders in your group.
100%. That's absolutely correct. All right, I'm going to move you out. I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll be right back. Hey, everybody, that was a great episode today. And, I get excited when we talk about residential real estate and starting out. And, we all start somewhere. And if you're a new investor, it's a great example for you. Get a hold of Joel's book. Take a look at it, read through it. It's a step-by-step guide to help you on your real estate journey. If you're somebody who's looking to scale your business, you're doing a little bit more, you're in the multifamily space, reach out. I'll be more than happy to get a hold of you and see what I can do to answer some questions and help you down the road. We're here every Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, Multifamily Unplugged. Pass this episode on to somebody else. And if you are a real estate investor, no matter if it's residential, commercial, I am holding my upcoming master classes coming up. Call us for dates. I'm doing a 2-hour overview on how to buy real estate creatively with little or no money down. I bought everything from single family to 450 unit apartment complexes with zero and no money down. If you're somebody who's looking to aspire, capitalize on the market the coming months, then this is a process that you really want to have a tool in your toolbox to use. Thanks for being here, everyone. Look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great week and a great rest of your weekend.